Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why I don't do controlled eccentrics on my deadlifts, because it always is something that people bring up. They're always like, oh, you would be so much bigger if you did controlled eccentrics every time they see training clips of me deadlifting. And I actually have really good training programming reasons and injury prevention reasons why I don't do that. And I want to break that down for you guys so that you understand what I'm doing and why that might be right for me, but it may not be right for everyone. But I still think it's the safest way to do a deadlift. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on scaling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Because the fact of the matter is there's a couple of misconceptions there regarding workload and eccentrics that a lot of people have, and a lot of it's bro myth, based on partial science without fully understanding the science behind it. Then there's the injury end of specific lifts. Eccentrics can be fantastic on some lifts, and they're dangerous and impact recovery a lot on others. And kind of knowing the difference is important when you're writing your training programming and your frequency and everything. Now, as far as eccentric reps, concentric reps, everything else, people get these really weird misconceptions regarding micro tearing in muscles, muscle growth, everything else. First of all, let's state, when we talk about micro tearing and tissue disruption or whatever else, we could argue that the micro tearing that people are talking about isn't actually necessarily part of growth. That's debatable. Tissue disruption is part of muscle growth, but that's at the chemical level. That is due to metabolites and things breaking down, and cortisol structurally breaking down tissue proteins at the chemical level, not because of mechanical stress. And there's a big difference there. But even if we want to go with the mechanical stress theory, what people need to understand, their concept is, okay, lowering the weight is pulling on the muscle, and lifting the weight is contracting the muscle, right? So you get more tears from the pulling. And that sounds okay till you realize how a muscle fiber works. How does a muscle fiber work? Everyone grasp this? Okay, muscle fibers, when they contract, so when your bicep contracts up, what's it doing? There are muscle fibers, their ends are pulling themselves together. That is actually stretching the individual fibers, because they're pulling together end to end, and they're being pulled on each end. Like right here, you'd have these pulling together, and on the other end of my hand, there'd be more fingers pulling the other way. When they're doing that, they're not compressing the fibers, they're pulling them into each other. Okay, so you're getting that same pulling effect even when you're contracting a muscle. It's still pulling on the ends of those muscle fibers against each other while they're pulling themselves together. That is still going to create various micro tearing. And when you think about it, when you're lowering a weight, what you're seeing is muscle fibers contracting also to control the weight on the way down. It's actually the same thing happening. Because you trying to prevent it from being lowered means there are fibers contracting to try to keep moving the weight up or to slow down its descent. If the muscle fibers are actually doing the same thing on both of them. Like down at the structural level, the muscle fibers aren't working in a different way when you're lowering a weight under control versus when you're lifting it. And that's an important point people need to grasp. They're doing the same thing. So when you think of it at that level, one of them's not going to cause more micro tearing in the fibers than others. There's arguments about muscle fascia. And you know what? It's never been proven that any sort of trauma to muscle fascia actually improves size at all. That's a very controversial theory. Now, that being said, what is it that we know about it? What does the studies show? Oh, we show, and this has been known for decades. This is stuff that was being studied 25 years ago. Because again, there's a very serious interest in making athletes bigger and stronger. There's billions of dollars tied up in that, so you damn well bet there's going to be money spent studying it. I mean, it's big business. Anything that's worth a lot of money is going to get money to study it. Should be common sense in a capitalist system. And the Russians, of course, and all of them, even during the communist days, were studying this stuff because they felt like sports and international sports and the Olympics were war, and they wanted to win. So even in a communist system, when there's nationalism involved, they'll throw resources in it. So this stuff has been studied pretty heavily. And what they found, and this is why a lot of people say, aha, eccentric reps are important to muscle growth, because what they found is that we're stronger on our concentric reps than our eccentric reps, meaning we could, there's more muscle fiber involved, meaning you can lower a weight that's heavier than you can lift, and it uses the same amount of muscle fibers. So what they found on eccentric only training in studies, that people who only lifted a weight versus people who did controlled eccentrics was sometimes slightly more than their 1 rep max. Meaning, like, or let's say they were doing lifting with 8 rep sets, and then you do 8 rep lowering but you put 10 to 20% more weight on so that it uses the same amount of muscle fibers, they found that the controlled eccentric groups gained just as much muscle. They were able to gain the same amount of muscle. And what that shows is that eccentric reps have a very strong hypertrophy potential because they recruit muscle fibers. And what this means is that usually they recruit about 80% of the amount of muscle fibers that you do lifting the weight. So in theory, if you only did concentric reps and turn the weight loose on a bench press or something, you had a machine that caught it and lowered it for you, versus when you raise and lower it, you're recruiting almost as many muscle fibers on the way back down as you did the way up. So a full rep on the raise and the lower recruits about 170 to 180% of the muscle fibers that just lifting it did. But you need to remember the eccentric uses less muscle fibers, and in fact we're stronger. We have strength left on our eccentrics when we fail on our positives. So what they've also found is that when people reached muscle failure on whatever lift, bench press, curl, doesn't matter, say the curl, when they reached failure on a strict curl in a machine and they couldn't lift it anymore, that they found the same weight could be lowered under control for a couple more reps because there were still a few muscle fibers left that were capable of doing that, because it takes less muscle fibers. You're stronger on the way down because it does less work, and that makes sense. To lift a weight uses more energy than controlling it on the way down. Right? More force involved, so more muscle fibers. But people get tied up in this idea of that. But what doing eccentric reps does, it makes each rep count for over a rep and a half if you were to compare it to not doing a concentric in terms of muscle fiber recruitment. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do twice as many reps, all right? It means you can do a couple more reps at best, maybe one more rep if you do concentric only. What we find is that concentric and eccentric reps, if you do the same amount of work with the same muscle fiber recruitment, give the same muscle growth. High reps and low reps, when the same amount of total workload is done, produce the same muscle growth. People following me here? Muscle growth happens with every type of training. If there is progressive overload there and your muscles are working hard, your muscles grow. All right? They grow. And the way the curve works on this, there's a certain threshold. You've got to produce a certain amount of work to make a muscle grow. If you don't work hard enough, a muscle doesn't get, nothing gets destabilized in it. All right? The homeostasis is maintained. The muscle doesn't grow. So you have a certain workload you have to reach before a muscle will grow. And most of us understand this. There's a certain amount of work you've got to do, or it's not doing anything. It's just going to laugh and stay the same size. When you reach that threshold, all right, here's your point to gain muscle. If you work harder, you'll gain a little more muscle. If you work a lot harder, you'll gain a little more muscle. It's a curve like this. So if your work is going up like this, the muscle growth is going up like this. And they'll reach a point to where, very quickly, to where if you do twice the work, you'll gain 5% more muscle. You twice the work again, you'll gain 1% more muscle. It's a shallow curve, and at a certain point, you can only stimulate so much muscle growth. So the whole point here is it doesn't work on the way that if you just do more and more work, you're going to gain proportionate muscle. You'll reach a threshold. You've got a threshold to where of work you have to do to make a muscle grow, right? And then you have a threshold to where if you work any harder, it won't grow anymore. So you've got a range in here that's somewhere in there is going to be your sweet spot. Right? And I think most of us grasp this. There's a point to where you train so hard, the muscle's only going to grow so much. You can't do limitless work and make the muscle grow. In other words, an 8-hour arm workout isn't going to make your bicep grow any more than a 30-minute or 45-minute workout that was efficient. Right? It's just not. That's reality. That's the real world. But, you're probably going to gain more arm off of a 30 or 45-minute bicep workout than off of a 3-minute bicep workout. I think most people can grasp this concept. There's a sweet spot in there, though, to where if you go outside that sweet spot, there's no change, meaning there's no extra growth up here and there's no growth down here in that curve. There's a range, but it's not proportionate. So people get this idea that, well, if you just do this, it's going to make the muscle grow more. No, if you did enough work to the muscle to get into that sweet spot range, doing a bunch more work, like let's say you hit that sweet spot on an exercise with whatever sets and reps, by adding a bunch of slow negatives, it's not going to grow more. You're already in that sweet spot for growth. And if you're near the maximum end of it, extra work isn't going to make it grow more. However, what you find on the deadlift, I don't believe in eccentrics on the deadlift, mainly because, number one, we're dealing with performance elements. But people do need to understand the same size can be gained with a whole variety of training, but they don't produce the same performance results, right? Some types of training will make you more explosive. Some will make you stronger at different rep ranges. There'll be carryover, meaning if your 10 rep max goes up, your 1 rep max will go up 2. If your 1 rep max goes up, your 10 rep max goes up 2. But if you do 10 rep sets, you're going to be really good at 10 rep sets. If you do 1 and 2 rep sets, you're going to be really good at 1 and 2 rep sets. If you lift really fast and explosive, you're going to be fast and explosive. All right? It's going to be peak strength, muscle stamina, speed. These are things we train for. Joint angle specificities. All right? You can train to be strong at certain ranges of motion, and if you don't do all the ranges of motion, you're not going to be equally strong relative to your lever arms through all the ranges of motion. Right? There's performance elements. The deadlift is an explosive lift with a big, heavy movement. I don't feel that there are performance benefits to doing the eccentrics. All doing eccentrics does is make you get better at lowering the weight. You can get just as much muscle growth through doing the same amount of workload with concentric reps, but you're going to get slightly better at doing concentric reps. Why do you need to get better at doing eccentric reps? You only have to lower it under enough control to not get disqualified at a powerlifting meet. There's not a big deal for most performance. Any test of strength, you're never going to be tested on how well you can lower 110% of your max on the deadlift. Because if you can lift it for a max, you can lower it. Anyone who's able to lift a weight on any exercise can lower that weight controlled even after hitting that lift. If they were able to do the lifting with good technique, they can lower it with good technique. Practicing the eccentrics makes you better at eccentrics. Just like practicing concentrics makes you better at the concentrics. There's carryover, but it's not 100% carryover. There's no performance benefit to controlled lowering. The other issue is that it fatigues the lower back more, and I believe that it causes injuries. Because your lower back, particularly when you lift like I do fairly high frequency deadlifting, I do high frequency pulling, I put a lot of work on my lower back. If I want to be able to deadlift at a high frequency, my lower back has to recover. What we find is that slow eccentric reps do what? They can interfere with recovery. They're tough on certain types of connective tissue. Again, they can cause micro tearing in muscle fascia. All right, that can cause certain fatigue that's harder to recover from. So if your lower back is in a fatigued state all the time because of your training and you're not taking into account recovery, you're at a higher risk of injuring your lower back. All right, your lower back is a weak link in a lot of exercises. Lower back could get you hurt on an overhead press. If your lower back is really fatigued and not recovered, you could actually hurt your back doing an overhead press. You could hurt your back doing a row. So when I'm programming lifting, the deadlift is one of the most difficult lifts to recover from. I don't feel that there's a benefit to leaving your lower back more fatigued 24/7 because you're trying to deadlift with a high frequency when there's no performance benefit to be gained from doing those eccentrics. If you're skipping the eccentrics, you can probably do an extra rep with a heavy weight, an extra rep or two here and there with the concentric, the lifting, that's going to give you better performance carryover, and you're still going to gain the same amount of muscle mass. So my point would be, there's no point to leaving your back in a fatigued state like that. In fact, I've gone over to rotating through to the trap bar sometimes simply because lower back recovery when you're deadlifting relatively heavy often can be a problem. When you're power cleaning all the time with it, you're rowing all the time with it, your lower back can become the weak link in your recovery curve. Okay, and that's not good. That's not a good thing when you're trying to be a strength athlete, when you're trying to be powerful, when you're trying to be athletic. Having a fatigued lower back 24/7 is going to get you hurt. So yeah, accordingly, I don't recommend doing controlled eccentrics on the deadlift. It's what leads to injuries. Just like I don't recommend touch and go for a totally different reason. I believe you should reset every rep at least 1 second between every single rep on deadlifts with it resting at the bottom. I believe in that too. I'm a strong believer in those things, and this is about injury prevention. That's the whole point. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.